I have recited to you some verses from a chapter of the Holy Quran which is called the Bee, which is chapter 16, An-Nahl. And the verses I have recited are verses 66 to 70. And surely there is a lesson for you in the cattle. We give you to drink of what is in their bellies, from between the feces and the blood, pure milk, agreeable to the drinkers. And of the fruits of the palms and the grapes you obtain from them intoxicants and goodly provision. There is surely a sign in this for a people who ponder. And thy Lord revealed to the bee, make hives in the mountains and in the trees and in what they build. Then eat of all the fruits and walk in the ways of thy Lord submissively. There comes forth from their bellies a beverage of many hues, in which there is healing for men. Therein is surely a sign for a people who reflect. And Allah creates you, then He causes you to die, and of you is He who is brought back to the worst part of life, so that He knows nothing after having knowledge. Surely Allah is knowing and He is powerful. The Holy Quran always refers Muslims to nature. And it has always surprised me that despite this repeated command, inna fi zalika la ayatin liqawmin yatafakkarun, therein is surely a sign for a people who reflect. And despite this, Muslims do not reflect. The Holy Quran mentions the stars and the moon and their movement through the skies, and says there are signs in them for people who reflect, who ponder, who think about them. And there are a number of verses in the Holy Quran which talk about things of this planet Earth, such as the fruits and the trees and the insects and animals as well. And 2 chapters of the Holy Quran, one is called the honeybee and another one is called the spider. The reason that the Holy Quran draws our attention to these things is that we may look at these creatures, see what they do and how they behave, and then learn lessons from them. If we look at the honeybee, what we find is this, that you have one queen bee and you have worker bees. Men in their world have a wonderful time because their only job is procreation and they don't take part in anything else, in any work or whatever. Now that bee makes, it's not a hive, it's a temporary place in some tree or house or wherever it might be. And what happens? That the queen bee sits in the middle and all the worker bees gather round their queen to protect her. And at that time, what they are doing is, they are sending out scouts And the scout's job is to look for a suitable place to build a hive. And they go off in different directions and they look for places and they come back and they gather at that swarm and they discuss. Yes, they do discuss. They talk about the different places they've been to. Someone did an experiment. They had 3 boxes. They put 3 boxes near a swarm. And only one of them was suitable. And the bees went out and they some looked into one box, box A, some looked into box B, some looked into box C. And they went back and their communication is their waggle, the fluttering of their wings. And you can see that those bees are discussing, they are talking. And how do they know that they belong to this swarm and not to some other? Because the queen bee gives off a chemical which lubricates all these bees. And the smell of that chemical is what makes each worker bee know which swarm it belongs to. And it makes the queen know that these are my workers. And it's very interesting, you see, if you take that pheromone and you take a human being and you put drops of that pheromone on that human, the bees will swarm to that human thinking that is their queen bee that they are supposed to protect. So obviously they communicate, but they use these chemicals to communicate. You see, in the Holy Quran, in other places, God talks, for example, about Solomon talking to animals and insects and so on and so on. And people always turn it into some kind of a miracle. That some revelation came down and it either taught the animals, the ant or whatever it is, to speak human language, or gave Solomon the ability to do so. But it may be that Hazrat Sulaiman, with the court that he had, with the scientists that he had, which are referred to as what? As magicians. Yes, because they had no word for science in those days. That they realized that animals and the insects, etc., communicate by using chemical messaging. And they did the same thing. Like this guy who did an experiment. He stood near a swarm, and someone went and put little traces of this chemical on his clothes, and all the bees went to him and they gathered round him in their thousands. But we digress. So I'll get back to my topic, which is the honeybee. And the interesting thing is that they are actually, by fluttering of their wings or waggle or moving their bottoms, they're actually conveying physical information. One flutter of a honey bee's wings tells the other bees that what this bee is talking about is half a mile away. So if a bee flutters its wings 4 times, the other bees know that it's found a place which is How far away?
2 miles.
2 miles away. Everyone see me for a lesson in fractions and arithmetic afterwards, please. Well, everyone got it wrong. Yes, 2 miles. And the energy with which that bee flutters its wings or waggles tells the others how convinced it is that about the suitability of the place it has found. And this is the interesting thing. An individual bee may be wrong, but group intelligence invariably and always leads them to making the right decision. There is one thing which bees do, which I would not recommend, and that is that those bees who are convinced that they found the most suitable place for their hive, others who disagree with them, they actually headbutt them to tell them to shut up. How dare you disagree with me? I wouldn't recommend that in the House of Commons. My God, perhaps I should recommend that for the House of Commons, I don't know. But all of this comes from acting upon this part of this verse of the Holy Quran, which says there are signs in this for people to reflect. And scientists are now reflecting on this. They've studied swarms, and what they've learned from studying those swarms, they've used to build software for air traffic control. Scientists have studied ants, and they've seen how they go in a line. And they've noticed the fact that ants don't try and overtake each other. They always follow, it's like motor cars in a lane on a motorway, following each other at constant speed, leaving the same gap between them. And someone actually took that and did an experiment. They took some cars and said, okay, you drive as you would normally, which would be dangerous to say to me because I usually avoid many accidents in going from A to B every time I drive. And they said to another set of people that the way you will drive is this. You've got to cover the same distance from one place to another, but what you will do is this. You will stay in your lane. You will not try and overtake each other. You will drive at 50 miles an hour and you will leave the same gap between your car and the car at the front, which is basically mimicking what ants do. And what happened? Those cars that followed this principle of nature got to their destination before those who went down motorways and zoomed in and out and changed lanes and drove fast and drove slow and so on and so on. So one way to look at these verses is this, that there is much that we can learn from the behavior of these creatures, whether they're birds or whether they're animals and whether they're insects. They're important to us. Obviously, they're important to us for pollination. There is great concern these days about the fact that bees in the United Kingdom are dying. And that will reduce pollination, so that will reduce the amount of crops which grow in this country. But apart from that, we can learn from their behavior. You see, ants do another interesting thing. Ants do another interesting thing. Maybe ants do that as well, I don't know. Ants do another interesting thing, which is this. They are not bothered about what anyone else does. Each one just simply carries out the tasks, the task or the tasks which are set to it, without bothering about what the others are doing. They don't say, you're supposed to be doing this, why aren't you doing it? Look, I'm doing my job. They're not bothered. This one's task is to take this piece of grain from here to there, and it will just do that. This one's task is to do something else, and it will do that. Now, there are two ways we can look at this thing. First of all, of course, we can apply all of these lessons in our lives. We can learn how the group intelligence of bees and ants and other animals, fish that swarm, birds that swarm, tells us that group intelligence eventually leads to the right decision. And what do we call this in normal life? It's called democracy. But we've learned it from birds and the bees. But there's another way of looking at this verse of the Holy Quran, or these verses in this chapter. Our queen bee, what we have to protect is the Holy Prophet Muhammad and the teachings of Islam. That is the queen bee. That is the center. That is what causes, just like the queen bee is fed by the worker bees so that it produces more offspring. In the same way, those teachings of Islam are going to produce more and more Muslims. And we are the worker bees. We are the ones who should gather round and protect that queen bee, protect the honor of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, and protect those teachings of Islam. Just like those bees go off to look for places where it will be beneficial for them to locate and work, in the same way, each one of us, wherever we are, we should be thinking about how can we propagate Islam, how can we spread Islam, how can we protect the honor of the Holy Prophet Muhammad and teachings of Islam. And if we do that, then we'll be successful in the same way as the queen bee and the honey bee is successful. And what is that nectar? The Holy Quran talks about this nectar that they produce. There comes forth from their bellies a beverage of many hues in which there is healing for men. The beverage that those teachings of Islam produce, which comes from the heart of this swarm, is what heals us spiritually. Honey, we know physically, is a good food that is used for many things. But the honey that queen bee, the honey that is produced by the Holy Prophet Muhammad in the form of religion of Islam, is what cures our spiritual ailments and diseases and problems. So there is much that we can learn from these animals. Particularly, as I said, if one insect is to do a task, it's not bothered about whether others are doing it or not. About the fact that group intelligence always leads to a better decision than people deciding individually and not involving others in what is happening and what is going on. And when the Holy Quran says there is surely a sign in what the bee does, and in fact it refers to others. I've just concentrated on the bees because there is no time to go into all the other things that are mentioned just here. The kettle and the palms and the grapes. If we reflect upon these things, how they grow, why they die, how they live together as communities, even in this physical world, we could learn many lessons from them. But certainly, at another level, we can use these things to cure our souls. For the religion of Islam and its teachings are not just for this physical world, but they're also for the hereafter and for our souls and for our spirits.